My guest today is Miles van der Molen, the CEO of CemAir in South Africa. Thank you very much, Miles, for spending some time with me today.
Thank you for having me on.
So you run what is essentially a regional airline in South Africa. And there's been some news in South Africa lately about, shall we say, a highly disrupted market. Could you tell us a little bit how you see the airline market in South Africa at the current time?
Firstly, in terms of what we do two things. So we're a domestic or regional airline, and in addition, we support a lot of other operators across the continent of various kinds with value-added leasing, ACMI leasing of regional aircraft as well. So we got a fair footprint across the continent with a fair spread from resource companies to reach other regional airlines and humanitarian support in some cases. In terms of South Africa, it's, I think worldwide, it's unprecedented time in the airline industry, and big changes here. South Africa's airline industry has been on unsustainable footing for some time, with dominant state-owned carriers running heavy losses and continual bailouts, with a fiscal climate for the country that's becoming a bit adverse. So for some time, we've been waiting for the end of the bailouts to inevitably happen, and that was going to mark a big change in the industry. That had started before the COVID-19 outbreak in December. SA Airways went into business rescue, and shortly after that, the regional subsidiary SA Express went into business rescue and subsequently gone into liquidation. So it was coming, and then of course the tsunami that is COVID-19 is just going to flatten everything in its wake.
It must be tough to operate in that environment, or is it an opportunity for you?
Well, a bit of both. Adversity does bring a lot of opportunity. At the moment, we aren't really operating in this environment. We're doing some repatriation flights from people who are stuck on the continent, but we're in a hard lockdown in South Africa, so there's no domestic flying at all, no international flying except for really cargo flights. Not a lot of stuff happening right now, but we're hoping it'll ease up soon.
So when I look at your fleet, you obviously love Canada. You 80% of your fleet is also turboprop. So how did turboprops work in South Africa, and as you point out, across the continent?
Turboprops have good versatility. So some of the places we operate into have limited runways available or limited airports. So they do have good applicability. It is a large continent, so jets work well for the greater distances, but traditionally a lot of our work has been in some pretty rural places where the turboprops have been quite good.
So do you see that this gives you an advantage for your fleet, let's say, compared to other airlines that are operating in the same environment?
We do. When the world starts to restart, we're expecting sort of a slow demand growth, I think, like everybody is, and that'll make regional airplanes easier to fill. So obviously you get the economies of scale when you're operating a 737, but you need a large number of people that you can consistently carry around in order to operate the airplane efficiently. Certainly in the early days, that simply won't be available even domestically, and thereafter, I think a lot of places will have a very slow rebound. Also, many routes in Africa were too small, really, for narrow-body equipment. So flying load factors, even in what you could call the good days now, where regional airplanes are probably more appropriate anyway. However, the strength of some of the big carriers was such that they could almost dictate how the market moved. All of that strength, I think, will be diminished through this mess, and on the far side, it'll be a much more level playing field. And I think a different approach may well get good traction.
So, how do you stay focused on your segment, and how do you sort of manage your costs and your risk in these with these challenges of state ownership and shall we say, an unusual region for air travel, meaning you've got some big centers, but that may not be the place for you to trade, and then you've got rural markets. that obviously are places where you could be strong?
So obviously regional airplanes work best on secondary route. Yes, the strong state-owned presence in South Africa has been a headache for the private operators here for many years. And that's why we had the over-border work in other countries where you could get you could stabilize. So the local operation allowed us to attract customers from abroad, and gave us depth in what we did, and allowed us to have more of the same type on the fleet, because although we couldn't deploy them all in the same market, we could have the same type across both markets and then make it viable. So that's how we got to that balance, largely because of the peculiar market we have here.
I noticed that other turboprop operators in the market, they're doing interesting things. For example, Ethiopian flies Dash-8s over very long segments, which we probably would not see in other places. And I noticed Air Botswana flies their turboprop from Gaborone to Cape Town on occasion. That's incredible.
Yeah, look, Gaborone Cape Town is a long sector in an ATR. I think they normally operate an Embraer 170 on that, but they have operated the turboprop time to time. We find the Q400 is quick enough that you can go quite far with it before you end up with a significant differential. I know Ethiopian had some long sectors. So that aircraft is slightly different. It's almost halfway between a turboprop and a jet. The traditional turboprops with speeds in the mid 200s are a slightly different category. But yes, you know, the is characterized by longer distances, and we operate a 500-mile sector in a turboprop, and just because of the way the market is formed, it can be done.
Do you see a growing interest at all for having a combi type turboprop in the market there?
We've never been strong in the freight segment. Obviously, at the moment, the freight guys are particularly busy. Yeah, we haven't seen that. We've seen more passenger operations, and the cargo operations we see in this part of the world normally are higher volumes and than we can be effective in. So we'll see where the market goes. But you know, different countries, it's largely driven by infrastructure where there's good roads. Freight operations are less required with turboprop distances, and where infrastructure is weaker, they tend to be more relied upon. But I think on the far side of this, the market is going to be fundamentally different, and we all need to have a look at what it looks like at that point, and you know, find the sweet spot.
I've been hearing extensively, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, people that I've been speaking to, it's consistent. I'm hearing from people say that the post-pandemic recovery will start at the regional level, typically with turboprops and regional jets. Is that a sense that you have down there as well?
I think that's a generally held view across the world, that when things kick off again, going to be people that are essential travel, and slowly that'll grow as the market, as confidence builds in the market. I think there's some people that on the discretionary travel side that will take longer to become confident of flying again. And I think the long haul guys sadly have probably the slowest recovery trajectory. So yes, we're expecting the regional market to bounce in two ways. So let me just close some applications here, because I'm sure these emails and everything's coming through. I can actually just close Outlook and stop it from constantly pinging us. All right, that should stop. So yes, I believe the essential travel tends to favor regional operators more, and also where narrow bodies were successful before with lower passenger loads, a regional airplane is a logical place to start.
Miles, I've seen, for example, in New Zealand and Australia, they're talking about creating a bubble market where they can operate. I've seen that apparently the Germans and the Spanish are trying to do that. One of the airlines in Europe is trying to see if they can create sort of some kind of bubble there. Do you see that kind of strategy working at all in Southern Africa?
I haven't actually looked closely at the bubble concept. Can you just describe it to me? And I can.
Sure. So it seems that, for example, New Zealand and Australia feel that they are in a comfortable enough situation with regard to the pandemic that they can allow travel between the two countries across the Tasman Sea. And in similar case, I think it was TUI in Europe is saying, well, Spain and Germany, we want to try and create a bubble there so that there's safe travel, air travel, and that during the summer, the Northern Europeans can go to Spain for some sunshine. And it seems that that might be a very clever way for operators and indeed nations to ease the travel restrictions, allow this very important segment of the economy to start reworking. I mean, if you think about, it's not just the air travel, it's the hotels, it's the taxis, it's the restaurants. There's this whole food chain that depends on travel. So that's the bubble concept.
Yeah, I believe that practically speaking, it's going to start in South Africa with domestic travel opening up first. And then there's a lot of pressure already to say, well, why are we not flying to low-risk countries? So, for example, Mauritius apparently has a few number of COVID cases. To exclude them simply because it's not South Africa doesn't make sense. Can we take a more sensible approach and say, you know, on a risk-based, get rid of this thing. We're just going on constantly. Risk-based approach. So just excluding, you know, every complete category doesn't make any sense. I suspect over time, you know, as the data fills in from COVID, that people are going to look at it, and you know, there's a fear that the cure will be worse than the disease itself, because you know the economic collapse that could be caused by the COVID response could have shockwaves far beyond what COVID could ever do. So we're expecting a moderating approach in the coming months, and we're expecting it to be led by those primary markets.
Okay. My last question, if I look 5 years ahead with you, what do you think is going to be happening for air travel in Southern Africa and CemAir in particular?
It's difficult to say, you know, such a time of uncertainty, but I think in South Africa we'll see a move away from the state dominance. I don't think it's affordable to maintain that model anymore in this environment. I think there's a lot of pressure to reduce visa requirements in Africa, which I think would do a lot of good for regional travel. And I think the market will be fundamentally different. I think there'll be fewer players, and there's an opportunity because of this. Again, the carriers that had traditional strength have now lost that globally. So the guys that were dominant on the continent were going to be Ethiopian, SA in our segment, and that's going to be eroded, and everybody's going to be starting almost from a zero base. In fact, some of the larger guys, I think, will be looking forward to getting back to zero in a couple of years' time. They'll have to earn their way back there. And that means smaller operators will have an opportunity to encroach, and that'll probably result in 2 to 3 years in a consolidation phase, would be my best guess.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Perfect. Thank you.